It happened almost 2 years ago, and I still avoid trains after midnight. At the time, I was working as a graphic designer for a small marketing company in the city. We had a major project due the next morning, so my boss asked if I could stay late to finish it. I didn't think much of it. Around 11:40 p.m., I packed my laptop, locked the office, and started walking toward the subway station. Normally the streets were busy, but that night the city felt strangely empty. The rain had just stopped. Water reflected the orange streetlights, and every footstep echoed between the buildings. By the time I reached the station, there was almost nobody around. The electronic sign above the platform flashed. Last train, 11:58 p.m. Perfect. I wouldn't have to pay for a taxi. Only 4 other people were waiting. An elderly man reading a newspaper, a woman wearing a long gray coat, a teenager with headphones, and a man in a black suit, standing perfectly still near the edge of the platform. Something about him immediately felt wrong. Everyone else occasionally looked around or checked their phones. He never moved, not once. His head was slightly lowered, and his hands rested calmly at his sides. I remember thinking he was probably exhausted after work. Nothing more. The train arrived exactly on time. The doors slid open with a metallic hiss. The 5 of us stepped inside. I chose a seat near the middle of the carriage. The old man sat near the front. The teenager dropped into a seat across from me. The woman stayed near the doors. The man in the black suit walked to the far end of the carriage and remained standing. The doors closed. The train pulled away from the station. For the first few minutes, everything seemed completely normal. The familiar rumble of the tracks, the soft announcements before each stop, the reflection of my tired face in the dark window. At the next station, the teenager stood up. Without saying a word, he stepped off the train. The doors closed again. I barely noticed. People got off trains all the time. But then something strange happened. No one got on. The platform outside was completely empty. The train continued. At the following station, the elderly man folded his newspaper, stood up, and quietly left. Again, no one boarded. The carriage suddenly felt much larger, much quieter. I glanced toward the woman in the gray coat. She was staring out the window without moving. The man in the black suit was still standing exactly where he had been since we boarded. He hadn't shifted his weight. He hadn't looked around. He hadn't even blinked. At least, I don't remember seeing him blink. The train entered another tunnel. For a few seconds, the windows reflected only the inside of the carriage. That's when I noticed something. The reflection of the man in the black suit wasn't standing where he actually was. My heart skipped a beat. I looked directly at him. He hadn't moved. Then I looked back at the window. His reflection seemed closer. I rubbed my eyes. When I looked again, everything appeared normal. I laughed quietly to myself. "You're just tired," I whispered. I pulled out my phone to distract myself. No signal. That wasn't unusual on the ground. But my battery, it had been around 60% when I left the office. Now it read 17%. I frowned. That made no sense. Before I could think about it, the train slowed for the next station. The doors opened. The woman in the gray coat stepped out. She never looked back. The platform outside was empty. Once again, nobody got on. Now only 2 passengers remained. May, and the man in the black suit. The doors closed. The train pulled into another long tunnel. For the first time that night, I realized I couldn't hear the usual automated voice announcing the next station. Only the sound of steel wheels echoing through the darkness. Then, very softly, I heard breathing. Not mine. Someone else's. Slow, deep, steady. I looked toward the man in the black suit. He was still standing at the far end of the carriage. At least, I thought he was. I kept staring toward the far end of the carriage. The man in the black suit hadn't moved. At least, I didn't think he had. The train continued through the tunnel, but something felt wrong. It should have reached the next station by now. I checked my watch. 上午12点14分. Only a minute had passed since I last looked. It felt like 10. The lights flickered once, then everything went silent. The familiar sound of steel wheels disappeared. The train was still moving, but I couldn't hear it anymore. Only that slow breathing. I swallowed hard. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed through the empty carriage. The man didn't respond. He didn't even look at me. I stood up. Every instinct told me to stay where I was, but sitting there felt worse. I started walking toward him. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. The breathing stopped. For a second, the silence was somehow even worse. When I was about 20 feet away, the lights flickered again. The carriage went completely dark. Less than a second. When the lights came back, the man was gone. My stomach dropped. I looked around wildly. The carriage was empty. There was nowhere he could have gone. The doors had never opened. I backed away until I hit one of the metal poles. My hands were shaking. "This isn't real," I whispered. Then, a voice spoke through the train speakers. But it wasn't the usual station announcement. It was distorted, broken, almost like someone was whispering directly into the microphone. "Next. Stop. Static. Don't. More static."
Look.
The speakers died. I pulled out my phone. Still no signal. Battery. 9%. It had dropped again. Without warning, the train slowed. Bright lights appeared outside. Finally, a station. Relief washed over me. The doors slid open. I hurried toward them, then stopped. The platform looked wrong. There were no advertisements, no benches, no station name. The walls were bare concrete. Every overhead light flickered at a different rhythm. And there wasn't a single person there. The electronic arrival board displayed only one message: no return service. I stared at it, confused. I had used this subway line hundreds of times. There had never been a station like this. A chime sounded. The doors were about to close. I should have gotten off. Instead, something made me look back into the train. At the far end of the carriage, the man in the black suit was standing exactly where he'd been before, motionless, watching me. Except this time, his head was raised, and I realized why I hadn't noticed his face earlier. There wasn't one, just complete darkness beneath the brim of his hat. The train doors began closing. Without thinking, I jumped back inside. The doors slammed shut. The train pulled away. I don't know why I did it. Maybe panic, maybe instinct, or maybe I had already made the wrong choice the moment I boarded that train. As the station disappeared into the darkness behind me, the speakers crackled one last time. A calm voice whispered, "Final passenger confirmed." About 3 years ago, I was desperate for money. My lease was ending. I had just lost my job, and I was taking anything I could find. One afternoon, I came across an advertisement looking for a night security guard at an office tower on the edge of the city. The pay was unusually high. The only condition was that the shift started at 10 p.m. and ended at 上午6点. When I arrived for the interview, the building looked abandoned. 40 floors of dark glass stretched into the night sky. Only the lobby lights were on. The manager, an older man named Harris, handed me a security badge and a ring of keys. Before I could ask any questions, he said something that caught me off guard. "No matter what happens, never go to the 27th floor after 3 a.m. I laughed, thinking it was a joke. He didn't laugh back. He simply slid a binder across the desk. Inside were pages of incident reports. Every report stopped at exactly 3 a.m. No explanations, no conclusions. Just blank pages after that. I asked him why. He closed the binder immediately. "You'll understand if you stay long enough." Then he walked out of the building, leaving me completely alone. The lobby was silent. The elevators hummed quietly. Rows of security monitors displayed empty offices. Everything seemed normal. At 2:58 a.m., I poured myself another cup of coffee. 2 minutes later, one monitor suddenly came to life. Camera 27到14. A single office light had turned on. Someone was sitting at a desk, perfectly still, facing away from the camera. I leaned closer to the screen. The building had been empty all night. So, who was on the 27th floor? I grabbed my flashlight. Without thinking, I pressed the elevator button. The elevator doors slid shut. I pressed the button for floor 27. As the elevator climbed, I watched the floor numbers light up one by one. 14, 18, 22, 25, 26. Then, nothing. The elevator stopped. The doors stayed closed. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. Then the lights overhead flickered. Every button on the control panel suddenly lit up by themselves. A loud metallic groan echoed through the elevator shaft. Without warning, the doors opened. I stepped into a long office hallway. It was completely silent. Rows of empty cubicles stretched into darkness. Computer monitors sat on every desk, but every screen was black. The air felt strangely cold. Too cold for a sealed office building. I switched on my flashlight and followed the hallway toward the office from camera. 27到14. The door was already open. Inside, the chair was facing the window, exactly as it had appeared on the CCTV. Someone was sitting there, motionless, back turned toward me. I tightened my grip on the flashlight. "Security," I called out. No response. I took another step. The office chair slowly rotated by itself, empty. Nobody was sitting in it. A chill ran through my body. Just then, every computer monitor in the office switched on at once. Not with Windows, not with security software. Every screen showed the same live CCTV feed. Me standing inside the office, I stared at the monitors. Each one displayed a slightly different angle. One from the hallway, one from the ceiling, one from behind me, one from inside the elevator. I froze. There weren't any cameras in the elevator. Then I noticed something worse. On the monitor, showing the office, someone was standing directly behind me. Tall, completely still, wearing a dark business suit. I spun around. Nothing. The room was empty. I looked back at the monitors. The figure was gone. At that exact moment, my radio crackled. A calm voice whispered through heavy static. "You stayed past 3. Then the power failed. Every light on the 27th floor went out. Only my flashlight remained. And somewhere in the darkness, I heard slow footsteps walking toward me. I used to work seasonal jobs whenever I had the chance. One autumn, I accepted a position as a night lookout at an old fire tower deep inside Black Pine National Forest. The tower hadn't been used for years. Most fire detection had been replaced by satellites. My job sounded simple. Stay in the tower from sunset until sunrise. Report anything unusual. Easy money. When I arrived, the ranger who drove me there didn't say much. He helped carry my supplies upstairs. Before leaving, he handed me an old emergency radio. There's one rule, he said. If this radio asks for help after midnight, he paused. Don't answer. I laughed. I thought he was trying to scare the new guy. He didn't smile. He simply climbed back into his truck and disappeared down the dirt road. By sunset, I was completely alone. The tower stood hundreds of feet above endless forest. The only sounds were wind and insects. At 11:47 p.m., I made my final routine radio check. Nothing. Midnight came. The forest became unnaturally quiet. No birds, no wind, not even crickets. Then, the emergency radio crackled to life. Heavy static filled the room. A frightened man's voice whispered through the speaker. Tower Joe, please answer. I'm lost. I can see your light. My heart skipped. That couldn't be possible. The tower was surrounded by miles of restricted forest. Nobody should have been out there. I grabbed the binoculars and looked down. Nothing. Just darkness between the trees. The radio crackled again. This time, the voice sounded closer. I'm almost there. I looked toward the spiral staircase leading up to the tower cabin. From somewhere below, I heard slow footsteps. Clang, clang, clang. Someone was climbing the tower. The footsteps stopped right beneath the trapdoor leading into the tower. I held my breath. The flashlight trembled in my hand. Whoever had climbed all the way up was standing directly below me. I waited for the trapdoor to open. 10 seconds. Nothing. 20. Still nothing. Then, the emergency radio crackled again. Heavy static filled the room before the same frightened voice whispered, Tower Joe, please don't let him find me. I looked at the trapdoor, then at the radio. The voice continued. He's already climbing. A loud, metallic bang exploded beneath my feet. The trapdoor shook violently. I jumped backward. Someone had hit it from below. Another bang, then another, but it never opened. The impacts suddenly stopped. Silence returned. I slowly walked toward the trapdoor and aimed my flashlight through the narrow gap around its edges. Nothing. Only darkness. Trying to calm myself, I unlocked the hatch and carefully pulled it open. The spiral staircase was completely empty. No footsteps, no person, no sound. It was impossible. I had heard someone climbing every single step. I hurried down 2 flights of stairs, shining my flashlight around the tower. Nothing. The entire staircase was deserted. When I climbed back into the lookout cabin, the emergency radio was already talking again. But this time, the voice wasn't frightened. It was calm. You answered. Every hair on my arm stood up. The speaker emitted a sharp burst of static. Then, another voice came through. An older man's voice. Weak. Broken. Don't listen to him. Turn off the tower light before he sees you. I froze. The tower beacon. The huge, rotating light mounted above the cabin. I hadn't even thought about it. It had been shining across the forest all night. I rushed to the control panel and switched the beacon off. The powerful light slowly stopped rotating. Darkness swallowed the forest. For a few seconds, everything was quiet. Then I heard it. A slow scrape. Outside, something was walking around the narrow balcony that surrounded the tower. Wood creaked beneath heavy footsteps. One step, then another. It circled the cabin without making a single sound otherwise. I forced myself to look through one of the windows. The flashlight revealed only the empty railing. No one was there. The footsteps continued, now directly outside the opposite window. I ran to it. Again, nothing. Whatever was circling the tower never appeared in the light. The radio crackled one last time. The frightened voice returned, barely above a whisper. Don't look down. Before I could react, something slammed hard against the underside of the tower. The entire structure shook violently. The windows rattled. Dust fell from the ceiling, and from somewhere far below, a deep, unnatural scream echoed through the forest. It didn't sound human. It sounded like the forest itself was screaming. The screaming stopped. Just like that, the forest became completely silent again. I stood frozen in the middle of the tower, trying to convince myself that what I'd heard was just the wind. Then I noticed something impossible. The emergency radio was silent, but the speaker light was still glowing. No static, no voice, just a steady green light. I reached toward it. Before my hand touched the radio, a different sound came from below. A slow, metallic scrape, like something dragging itself up the spiral staircase. Not footsteps, something heavier. I backed away from the trapdoor. The scraping grew louder, then stopped directly beneath me. A few seconds later, the trapdoor handle began to turn, very slowly. It wasn't shaking anymore. Someone, or something, was carefully trying to open it. I grabbed a heavy steel emergency axe hanging beside the door. The handle kept turning. The trapdoor lifted only a few inches. Complete darkness waited underneath. My flashlight couldn't reach the bottom. Then I heard breathing, slow, deep, not human. Without thinking, I slammed the axe into the trapdoor. It crashed shut. The breathing stopped instantly. For nearly a minute, nothing happened. Then the emergency radio burst to life. An older man's voice shouted through the static. Listen carefully. You have to leave before 12:17. If you're still inside the tower, it won't let you go. The transmission cut off. I looked at the digital clock. 上午12点14分. Only 3 minutes remained. I threw my backpack over my shoulder and rushed toward the staircase. Halfway down, my flashlight swept across the wall. Someone had carved words into the old wooden boards. Do not let IT reach the light. The letters looked fresh, as if they had been scratched there only moments ago. Another message appeared farther down. It copies voices. I stopped breathing. The frightened man on the radio, the old ranger, the older voice. Any of them could have been lies. Then, the emergency radio clipped to my backpack crackled again. This time, it spoke in my own voice, perfectly. Don't run, you're almost safe. I ripped the radio from my shoulder and threw it down the center of the spiral staircase. Instead of hitting the bottom, it kept falling, for far longer than it should have. I never heard it land. Then, from somewhere deep beneath the tower, my own voice echoed back one final time. Too late. Those eyes never blinked. They simply stared at me from somewhere impossibly deep below the tower. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my flashlight. The beam flickered. When I looked over the railing again, the eyes were gone. I didn't wait. I ran down the spiral staircase as fast as I could. Every step echoed through the tower. Halfway down, I heard another set of footsteps, keeping perfect pace with mine. But they weren't behind me. They were below me, coming up. I stopped. The footsteps stopped too. I took one slow step downward. Clang. The same sound answered me. Closer. The flashlight suddenly went out. Darkness swallowed everything. I slammed the flashlight against my hand. Nothing. Then, in the darkness, a pale green glow appeared. Not from outside. From the emergency radio lying at my feet. I had thrown it into the endless staircase. It should have been gone. Instead, it was sitting on the step in front of me. The speaker crackled. My own voice whispered, "Don't turn around." Every instinct told me to run. Instead, I slowly looked over my shoulder. At the very top of the staircase, a man stood perfectly still. He wore the same forest ranger uniform as the man who had dropped me off, but his face was completely black, like someone had erased it. Only two pale glowing eyes remained. He raised one hand, not to wave, to point, behind me. Before I could react, something enormous began climbing out of the darkness below. It wasn't a person. It wasn't an animal. It was a towering mass of living shadow that twisted unnaturally around the staircase, its pale eyes opening one after another across its body. The entire tower groaned. Wood snapped. Bolts screamed. The staircase began collapsing. I jumped over the broken railing onto the emergency escape ladder attached to the outside of the tower. The cold night air hit my face. Above me, the tower shook violently. Behind the windows, the shadow filled the entire lookout cabin. Its glowing eyes watched me descend. I climbed faster than I ever thought possible. Just as my boots touched the forest floor, the tower collapsed. The top cabin crashed into the trees with a deafening roar. Silence returned. The shadow was gone. At sunrise, a rescue team finally reached the site. The ranger who had driven me there was with them. He stared at the wreckage without saying a word. Then he looked at me. Quietly, he asked, "You answered the radio, didn't you?" I nodded. He closed his eyes. "We buried that radio beneath the tower 32 years ago. No one has ever brought it back. I never went near another fire tower again." A month later, a package arrived at my apartment. There was no return address. Inside was my old emergency radio. Clean. Undamaged.